This is the Page Publishing Book Club. How you doing? How you doing, Rob Barrett's my engineer. I'm your host, Alice Stockton Rossini. Are you having a midlife crisis at 30? You heard right, midlife crisis at 30. It happens. Lisa Brandenburg understands completely and documents the pressures she felt in attempting to come to terms with trying to have it all. The name of her book is Run.
Well, I will say that I did meet my husband when I was 30 years old. So at that point, I had heard so many different, like, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with this guy? Why aren't you settling? What's happening? And, it really wasn't until I met my husband that I realized all those lonely nights, laying down, questioning, well, what is wrong with me? It made me think, am I running? What's going on here? So loosely based on it, because trust me, some of the things that came out of my head definitely didn't come out of my life, but I definitely can say I was inspired by finally meeting my husband.
How long have you been married?
I have been married now for 11 years. So I know it seems odd that the book is just coming out now. I actually started writing this book it was a very cool date, 04/05/06. So I started this book. It was before I was married, before I had kids, and then I got married, and then I had kids, and I put it on hold for a very, very long time. And I picked it up again in 2015 and finished it in 2016. But my experiences, were still there. All the thoughts were still there. And I think I actually wrote a better story because I lived more and I knew more about what relationships should be like and could be like and what you don't want. So even though it took me 12 years to get there, I'm so proud of what I did,
Well, trust me, people have waited longer than 11 years to finish. Yeah, you'd be amazed. People wait 20, 30, 40, and 50 years, but usually there's something that happens that, makes that made you decide, I got to pick this up now.
Yes. I did have that come to Jesus moment, and it was through a childhood friend of mine. I knew this guy from elementary school. He was a Brooklyn police officer. Decades passed by. We're friends on Facebook. He and his wife opened up the Verdi Echo School, which is a charter school in Melbourne, Florida. And when I sent him a message, I go, man, when I see what you're doing with your life, I feel like I've done nothing. And my friend wrote me the most simplest line. He wrote back, it's never too late to make a difference. And I could cry right now because I was like, oh my God, you're right. And I actually dedicated the book to my childhood friend, John Verdi, because he was the one that made that comment. And I finished it up and I sought out a publisher and I got it done.
Well, it's interesting. You said that you started to question your romance. And that, it wasn't all it was cracked up to be. And the name of your book is Run, which makes it sound like, wow, you found what you were looking for, and then it wasn't so great.
Well, it's actually funny that you say that, and I don't want to say too much because the book is Run, but we run away from things and we also run toward things.
That's true. I didn't think of that. You can run towards something. And I think a lot of women can relate to kind of just going along and having your career and not really thinking about the whole relationship thing.
It's true. And I often wonder, though, how much of it is I'm thinking about my career versus I'm really afraid to take that leap and allow somebody into my life. So sometimes we mask things like, oh, I can't, I'm working. But as well as I do, you always make time for the things that you want to make time for. So Lonnie, my main character, she's vulnerable. She's scared. She's assertive. But, all strong women have some sort of fear in them. So she says she's, too busy working, but is she?
So we find out what happens when she meets this man and the twists and turns that their relationship takes.
Exactly.
All right.
Exactly. And a lot of women, unfortunately, because as much as things have evolved in our country, women can be powerful, there is still some stereotypes out there. You know, oh, you should settle down. Oh, you should be with somebody. And we internalize these things, and sometimes we ignore those red flags that are glaring. You say, oh, it's not that big of a deal. I can live with that. I mean, Richard is kind of gross sometimes. You know, she'll have just spent the day cleaning up her entire house to make everything beautiful, and then he'll go and brush his teeth, and there's toothpaste all over. And we tend to overlook those things when the little hairs on our neck go up. And the question is, do you give in to that and just say, it doesn't matter to me, I'll live with this? Or do you say there's got to be something more to it? So do you run away from something or do you run towards something?
All right. So where do we meet you? Where do we find you?
So I had the Middletown Public Library, one of the biggest libraries here in Monmouth County, had a book event there, and it was great. They said that my attendance was the biggest one they had seen so far. It was even bigger than Debbie Maycomer, so that was exciting. I got to speak at a mom's group, and I got the best feedback ever. They said, Lisa, I just want you to know that you inspired the women to start doing whatever projects they had, because I don't just talk about the importance of writing if you want to be a writer. I said, you know, if there's something you want to do, just start doing it with the next step. Don't worry about the whole process. Just do your next step. And I'm going to be going to the Union Beach Library to set something up there. So I'm starting local, and then I'll branch out, and I'm happy to do any sort of interviews, book clubs that anybody might be interested in.
Right. I think you might have a career in motivational speaking, Lisa. This is as much about your enthusiasm for just getting this book done as it is about the book itself. Thank you. Mary Ellen Spruill was a nurse anesthetist for 34 years, and her book is a series of diary entries entitled Waking Up, an Anesthetist's Diary. It was inspired by her experiences. She started it when she retired 12 years ago, and finally, it's finished. Mary Ellen.
It reads like a diary, and it's written in the first person, present tense, so she is telling the story as she's writing it, just as though it was still happening. The story is about Emily. She came on hard times. Marriage broke up, and she ended up with 3 little kids to support. So she was driven into this career, which is a fairly high-paying career, so she could support her kids and keep them in their little house. So it's the story of her struggles and how she gave up her Catholicism after 15 years of Catholic school. It just wasn't working for her. So she worked on her career, and it drove her into a relationship with God and being surprised by God, really, in spite of herself. So the book kind of, it lulls you into a sense of relaxation and laughter, and then all of a sudden you're zinged into some tense, horrible situation in the next diary entry.
There's some interesting twists and turns. There's a conflict between her new boss.
Mm-hmm.
Her brother joins a cult.
Right.
Her former husband gets malignant melanoma. I mean, what are you, Superwoman, this woman?
I look back and I say, did all this really happen to me? I can't believe it, but there it is in writing, so...
It's like you race to the scene, you solve the problem, you go to the next thing.
Right. One thing crashes after the other. But luck was with her. I mean, even when the new boss fires her and she's out of work for a couple weeks, she's offered this new position as an instructor in a school of anesthesia. So that was quite a big new challenge for her, and she was delighted to have a new opportunity. And she went back and was getting her master's degree to qualify to do that. But then she ran into troubles with the new doctor in that new hospital, with the head of the anesthesia school. He was another piece of work. Legally, she was vulnerable for liability because the new boss wasn't really backing her up. So she went back to her prior situation. And as she moves through life, she's driven more and more to see God in what is happening and to be surprised. And instead of hating the career, she began to really enjoy it. She remarried, and life became very sweet till he developed cancer. But luckily, he did recover, and it ends on a scary note with an incident with a tractor-trailer truck, which I'm not going to give it away. My ultimate goal for this book is that it would become a TV miniseries because it's sort of written almost like a screenplay, with the different little diary entries. It could happen. I mean, I haven't seen any stories about anesthesia. Anesthesia is kind of hush-hush. There's a lot of medical shows out there, but anesthesia, nobody's telling the story, and it's being told in this book.
But yet, it seems like you take there's a lot of things that happen in this book that have nothing to do with anesthesia.
True. It's the woman's life, the story of a single woman and her struggles. And it's a story of anesthesia practice in the 1970s and 80s. All these stories are intertwined. And I'm going to put it in the anesthesia journals and things like that because the book is really dedicated to nurse anesthetists. These are the people really working behind the scenes and really taking care of people.
So true, Mary Ellen. Thank you. Skip Vaughn was sitting in his car while the rain pounded down on his car roof in Huntsville, Alabama. And that's when we talked about his book entitled Vietnam Revisited. Skip, you've never served in the military, let alone Vietnam, but you are compelled to write about the men and women who have. Why?
But I am of that era. I'm 63 years old. So I remember I had friends and classmates that went to Vietnam, and it was a tough time. And of course, the nation was against that war, and it was a very unpopular war in Vietnam. Anybody who was in uniform, they caught the brunt of the nation's displeasure with the war. And so they didn't receive a welcome home. They were shunned. They were called baby killers. And I'm trying to do my little part to right that wrong. I'm trying to preserve their stories because they need to be preserved. We need to thank them. After 50 some years, we need to thank them for what they did for our country. They caught the brunt of the nation's displeasure. I mean, it was really bad. So I'm talking to people who did amazing things and pretty much kept them to themselves. They didn't share their stories for 50 some years. And so I'm hearing amazing stories. I mean, they're telling me stuff that they didn't tell their spouse. They didn't tell their friends. They just quietly came back and resumed their lives. They took off their uniform and went back to work or went back to school. And so the scars are still there. I mean, they were really mistreated. And the government now is saying we're commemorating 50 years since the Vietnam War. And so in January of 2015, I started interviewing Vietnam veterans and Vietnam era veterans every week. And to date, I've interviewed 171 of them. And thanks to Page Publishing for giving me the opportunity to write this book. We're preserving their stories. I really want to write as many of these as I can. So it's an ongoing thing. I'm the editor of the Army newspaper here at Redstone Arsenal in North Alabama in Huntsville. And so it's an ongoing series in our weekly newspaper here, the Redstone Rocket. In the book, the first 2 years of that series. And to date, 5 of those veterans in my book have died. That's the urgency I feel because we're getting older. I mean, the average age of the men and women I'm interviewing is mid-70s. We're not going to live forever. So I'm trying to preserve the stories while we can.
How was your series received?
Very well. In fact, I've got a waiting list of veterans who want to be interviewed. This area of the country is very patriotic, the Tennessee Valley here in North Alabama. So we have a lot of military folks who retire here. And so I look for the cap that says Vietnam veteran. But basically, I stop people who look like they might be of that era, and I ask them, hey, did you serve in Vietnam? And 70% of the time, they'll say, yeah.
Well, what are you finding?
I think it helps them to share their stories. They've kept them inside. They were young. Of course, when you're young, you feel like you're bulletproof, and you go over there and you find out it's not like in the movies. These are real bullets, and this is real blood. And a lot of them, they still have nightmares. They're still trying to recover. I mean, you never really get over seeing a friend or a loved one or someone you're close to die in combat. You never get over that.
Right.
And it helps them to talk about it.
Sure.
It actually was published in July of 2017, and it's still selling. And so I'm signing books, and people are asking about it. And mainly, I might never break even for the personal investment, but it's just the fact that I'm sharing these stories that really need to be told.
Nice, Skip. A real labor of love. Thank you. We have got to take a short break, but we are coming right back with so much more. Stay with us.
Attention all authors. Page Publishing is looking for authors. Have you written a book and want to get it published? Page Publishing will get your book into bookstores and for sale online at Amazon, Apple iTunes, and other outlets. They handle all aspects of the publishing process for you: printing, cover art, publicity, copyright, and editing. Call 800-204-6099 now for your free author submission kit. That's 800-204-6099 for your free author submission kit.
We're back on the Page Publishing Book Club. I'm your host, Alice Stockton Rossini. William Hill bought and sold real estate, worked in the cattle business, and did a lot of business with banks in his home state of Vermont. And then very bad things started to happen. He details his nightmare in his book entitled, Where is the Justice? Tell us what happened, William.
Well, we was just a local guy, and I did a lot of business with local banks. I made them a lot of money, and they helped me make some money, and then all of a sudden the bankers got too big, I guess. They got in a lot of trouble with the government. The government moved in here, and being a customer of the bank, I got dragged right into it, and I got accused of a couple things that I didn't do. And I mean, you can't fight them. I talked to several lawyers, and they said, "Oh, don't fight them because they got all the power and their right they did." Even the judge was on their side. It's just.
What do they accuse you of doing?
The one thing I did was 3 different banks were affiliated together, and one of the bankers he was the president of one bank, the director of another bank, and this other bank called me one morning, and he needed to borrow quite a lot of money. But he's up to his credit limit. I had a good credit limit, and they said, "Can they put it against mine?" I said, "Well, I don't know if that's all legal and everything." Yeah, they said, "Be okay, go ahead." I said, "Yeah, it was all because I knew he'd pay it back," and he did. I never made an application, never went to the bank or anything. But the government accused me of making a false statement on a loan application, which I never made. And boy, I just couldn't fight them. I had 4 or 5 lawyers, and they said, "You're like sitting out there in a rowboat with 17 torpedo boats pointed against you. You just can't. You can't beat them. You better go along with them."
What kind of business were you in?
Well, I bought and sold real estate. I had in the cattle business, and I had several businesses. I worked hard all night and day. But
So you did business with these bankers, and one of them wanted to borrow money against your credit limit.
he went to the other bank, and they told him he could put it against somebody else's credit. And I guess that's a common thing, because I got calls from several bankers after that and said there was nothing wrong with it, what we did, and he paid it back.
But you got in trouble when...
Prosecutor, I mean, he was out to get anybody he could, and he charged me with making a false statement on a loan application, which I had never made. 3 lawyers, they said, "For $10,000, you better go in and plead guilty." Well, I didn't do it. I didn't want to do it. I wouldn't do it, but they finally twisted my arm till I did, which was the only dishonest thing I did, I got a $10,000 fine. I'm a felon for life, and they took a lot of my properties. And I bought one big property, which was probably maybe bigger than what I should have bought. And I was completely misrepresented. And then the FBI got involved, and the banks, and then they came to see me and said they was going to help me because what the banks had done to me. Of course, they lied to me. And I went through probably 30 or 40 government officials trying to get things straightened out, and every time I get close to it, they'd give it to somebody else. And it's all pretty much all in this book. And
You never really got justice then.
no, I never did. Even the judge was on their side. Really, he was anything they wanted. I had to go to a couple other trials and testify. Anything the U.S. attorney wanted, he was more. Anything anybody else would protest or something, he'd turn it over. It was completely on their side. It was I never see such a mess. You really watch the news with the talking about the government. Every one of those things happened to us. And then we had a stepson. He got hurt and he made some money, and then he spent it on some things he shouldn't have. He got in trouble. So they came and raided our house. It was about 40 marshals and stuff, trashed their house, smashed the door in. Of course, there was nothing in there for them. Smashed up all the Christmas presents and everything, you know. There was nothing to find. We had a little bit of money, and they took that. You see, the marshals, it was about 40 of them that showed up there one day. We weren't home. We came home, they were there, they'd smashed the door in, they'd gone in, dumped every closet and every barrel drawer. My wife had the Christmas presents all wrapped for the children and the grandchildren. They smashed them all up, opened them up and tore them up and smashed them up. And then I had some money. I don't know if I had a little bit of money. I said, yeah, so I opened my safe, but I was going to blow it up, and they did, and they took it. 5 or 6 months later, the government says we're going to give it back to you. And when they did, it was $5,000 short. I know they must have somebody pocketed $5,000. They wouldn't even talk about that. It's just stuff like that going on all the time.
It's a nightmare.
Yeah, it was a nightmare. It was. It really still is, kind of. But I had to. When I first started, I was scared to death. I was scared. I thought people in those jobs had to be more honest than anybody. But I'll tell you, they were the biggest bunch of crooks I ever ran up against.
Well, did it feel better to write it all down?
Well, I thought other people should know about it. I didn't write a book to make money. I just thought people ought to know what could happen to them, you know.
Your story's unbelievable, William.
Well, it is. It is. That's why I wrote it. It's all documented. The names and everything of the people involved are in it and all.
Jeez.
I was bashful about that.
Okay, well, I hope somebody doesn't come after you for it.
No, I'm not worried about that.
Okay. Well, I hope
I'm not afraid of anybody anymore. I used to be, but...
All right, William. Robbie Howerton works for a roofing company by day, and when he gets home, he writes. The name of his first book, published by Page, is entitled Letters from Dad. But you've had other books published, right, Robbie?
Yeah, I've got 3 books published. This new one I've got published with Page.
So how long have you been writing?
I wrote my first, which just a short story, when I was in the 5th grade, but I got my first book published in 2010.
Nice.
And then Letters from Dad, it's about a young girl has low self-esteem and low confidence, and she really loves softball, but she doesn't think she's good enough to try out for the team. And her dad gets drafted and has to go to war, and he starts sending her letters of encouragement, trying to get her to live her dreams. And she tries out for the softball team and makes the team. And then him and her keep sending letters back and forth, and with him trying to keep her encouraged and not give up on anything. And then she receives word that he was killed in the war. And she goes through a big depression, not knowing what to do and giving up on herself again. And then her friends on the softball team help her overcome it. And then she decides that she's going to try to lead her team to the softball championship in honor of her dad that was killed in the war. What originally gave me the idea is my sister and her husband just recently got out of the Army. And I came up with the idea when he had to go overseas. And some dreams I've had. Most of my books comes from dreams that I have.
I mean, she's able to overcome her father's death and go further than she ever thought possible.
Yes. Never give up on your dreams.
So you're kind of imagining what it would be like.
Yeah.
So now what?
I've been doing local book signings, and I'm going to try to set up a book tour or something, Middlesboro, Kentucky.
Oh, okay. So you have a local library?
Yeah.
And you have a local paper?
Yeah, we've been dealing with them.
So they know that you've written a book. You're a local author.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's exciting.
Yeah. I just recently started my next book.
Oh, good, Robbie. Keep working on those book signings. Finally, M.M. Burr details his life story in his book entitled From the Eyes of the Beholder. And what a life you've had.
Well, I had a disability throughout my life, and at the age of 24, my life was shattered as I was diagnosed with a mental illness. And I can no longer have my dreams of getting married, having children, owning a house.
But you were able to write a book. That's quite an accomplishment.
Yes, that's correct.
So in writing this book, what do you want people to learn or to realize?
Well, the thing is, I discussed my hospitalizations for my mental illness from 1988 when I had my first mental breakdown, and then it goes up until I had two other mental breakdowns going through 2013 when I had my last mental breakdown. And I discussed my diagnosis was schizoaffective with mood disorder and anxiety.
So what do you do with yourself all day?
I work on my hobbies.
Oh, what are your hobbies?
I have a stamp collection, and I've put in some of my items on eBay for sale. I also work at a supermarket part-time. I am capable of working because I have been working for the past 20, 25 years, just part-time.
Good for
Yes,
you.
yes.
Good for you.
Yes. What happened was in the year of 1999, I decided to write some notes. I wrote 12 or 13 pages of, my history. And I decided, like around 2012 or 13, that I wanted to go further and write more into it. And I decided to expand on my 12 pages. And that's how I got to like 102 pages on my book. And then I decided to get it published. I commemorated the book in memory of my mom because she died of metastatic cancer. She was 63 years old when she died.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
You said in the beginning, you talked about psychics.
Yes.
What was that about?
Well, for some reason, I had this urge to see a psychic, when I was like 18 or 19,
Uh-huh.
And in my mid-20s, I went to like several psychics, and like they would say, "Oh, there's a curse on you. There's a curse on you. I have to remove the curse." And then they would ask me for money,
Okay, and it wasn't that you were cursed, it was that you suffered from mental illness.
I guess so. I think I suffered from attention deficit disorder. I know when I was like 5 years old, my brother's godparents' daughter took me to a doctor to see what might be wrong with me. And I think maybe that I probably suffered from attention deficit disorder.
Well, do you feel better now that you've written a book?
Hey, my life could be better, to tell you the truth.
Well, I hope it gets better. And we are out of time. I hope you've enjoyed this edition of the Page Publishing Book Club. I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. See you next time.